The Detroit Lions have rewritten their franchise history books with consecutive wins in a season, best record to open a season in Lions history, and so many other moments that have stood out as fantastic and historical events in Detroit's sporting history. And the Lions are looking to continue that on Thursday night as they host the division rival Green Bay Packers, a team that they met with just over a month ago in the rainy monsoon of Lambeau Field and emerged victorious on that day. This matchup is massive for both teams. If Green Bay were to win this matchup, they would jump to 10 and 3. They would be within one game of the Detroit Lions in the first place for the NFC North, as well as putting the Detroit Lions just half a game ahead of the Minnesota Vikings, who continue to win against all odds. If the Detroit Lions win, they essentially end Green Bay's hope at a division title. They essentially end Green Bay's hope at getting and hosting a first round game in the playoff. And they jump ahead to a pretty wide margin in the driver's seat for the NFC's number one seed. However, it's not going to be easy. On what is essentially a short week for the Detroit Lions, they have a lot of injuries, especially in the front seven. And today we're going to take a look at those injuries as well as take a look at both opponents and talk about which team is going to win, what the game predictions are, and why the Detroit Lions might have an uphill battle for win number 12. So, starting off, let's take a look at the two teams right now. As I mentioned, the Detroit Lions have set franchise history records with 11 straight wins and an 11-1 opening to the season. They are franchise records. The Detroit Lions have never done either of those two things. And as of right now, both streaks are active and alive. The Lions rank as the league's number one scoring offense and the league's number two scoring defense, despite losing a lot of their playmakers, despite losing a lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball. They are still one of the league's premier defenses, one of the league's premier teams. And I do not expect that to change even with the roster rotation that we've seen this week. Green Bay, on the other hand, is 9 and 3. They are currently the NFC's sixth seed in the playoff race, but their losses come to the second seeded Eagles, the first seeded Lions, and the fifth seeded 10 and 2 Minnesota Vikings, all of which came down to 11 combined points. Now, with that being said, the Green Bay Packers are also a very good team, ranking as the eighth scoring offense and the 10th scoring defense in the league. Both teams have an argument to not only make the playoffs, but to win this football game. On any given matchup, these two teams could walk away with a victory against each other. The last time we saw it in Green Bay, the Detroit Lions were the victors, but this time in Ford Field, there's a good chance that the Green Bay Packers could walk away. They split the season series a year ago, and they've gone back and forth pretty much since Dan Campbell arrived in Detroit as division rivals for the top of the conference. The Detroit Lions in their last matchup, as I mentioned, in week 9, were at Green Bay. They had a 24-14 victory where the Lions won time of possession, they won the turnover battle, and they won the battle for penalties, but it wasn't a blowout. Right? Even though the score was a 10-point margin of victory, the Green Bay Packers had more yards, they had a better rushing attack, and a better passing attack on the day. And if it wasn't for the missed field goal as well as the pick six, that game is tied going into the fourth quarter and tied at the end of things. And who knows how the game may have turned out in overtime. This game was much closer than I think the score really indicated. There was a lot of back and forth. There was a lot of big plays on both sides. And this time around, the Lions can't rely on a pick six. The Lions can't rely on a missed field goal. And I do think they're going to have to play a better game this time around than even last time to walk away with their 12th victory on the season and continue their winning streak to 11. The big talking points going into this game is the injury report. The Detroit Lions have several players that may not be available and a couple that have already been ruled out. Taylor Decker is doubtful for the game. I don't know if he's officially been ruled out, but he is very unlikely to play. He has been suffering with an injury for the last couple of weeks and needs another couple to recover. Levi Onwuzurike, a player that is having a career season for the Detroit Lions, has not practiced all week either and is likely not to play, as is defensive lineman Josh Paschal, a player that in his third year of NFL ball, is finally starting to figure it out, has become one of the league's best edge setters and one of the league's best run stoppers on the defensive line. Unfortunately, he will miss his third game of the season. DJ Reader is set to miss his second game of the season after having a career day on Thanksgiving. But the good news is that Carlton Davis and Emmanuel Mosley are both expected to be healthy. Carlton Davis being limited in practice with a hand and I believe a groin injury, while Emmanuel Mosley has been fully practicing all week and after being a healthy scratch a week ago, is hopefully ready to take his spot in the secondary and truly shine for really the first time in well over 2 seasons. Taking a look at some of these players more in depth, Levi Onwuzurike has 19 tackles, a sack and a half, 10 quarterback hits, and a forced fumble on the season. With a career high in sacks, QB hits, and snaps played, he is easily having the best season of his young NFL career. After suffering through back injuries, after suffering through lost seasons due to injuries over and over again, he has finally started to be healthy. He has finally played a majority of the games in a given season and not suffering through a massive setback. And he's played quite well. I know the statistics might not show it, but for a defensive tackle and a rotational defensive tackle at that, playing about 40% of the snaps for the Detroit Lions defensive line, he's been impactful. He's been a good football player. I do expect him to be re-signed at the end of this season going into next year. It'll be a cheap deal, but I do think the Lions like to keep him around. And it is a loss in their pass rush to not have Levi Onwuzurike within the rotation. Similar things to be said about Josh Paschal, a third-year player who's put up 19 tackles, 2 sacks, 5 tackles for loss, and 3 quarterback hits. He has become an elite edge setter. He has been a great run stopper. I think he is one of the best defensive ends in the NFL at setting the edge and forcing running backs back inside. He is fantastic at controlling the line of scrimmage, and it's going to be a massive loss, especially against a great Green Bay team with Josh Jacobs, who is a top 5 rusher in the league this year. They need Josh Paschal, and even though they won without him last time, it's going to be very tough to do so again. DJ Reader is the same thing. 18 tackles, 4 TFLs, 3 sacks on the season, 8 quarterback hits, coming off of a career day on Thanksgiving with 2 sacks and 2 TFLs versus Caleb Williams and the Chicago Bears. He is a massive part of what the Detroit Lions do on defense, both figuratively and literally. He is a huge run stopper on the interior of that line. Him and Aleem McNeil lead the Detroit Lions as one of the best defensive tackle duos and one of the best run stopping duos in the NFL this season. Without DJ Reader, the Detroit Lions will likely have to rely on Broderick Martin at that defensive tackle position, who was elevated from the injury reserve a few weeks ago. The second-year defensive tackle has started just 1 game in his NFL career and now may be thrust into the spotlight in a divisional matchup with playoff implications. It is a tough matchup for the Lions. Their front 7 right now consists of Zadarius Smith, Aleem McNeil, Broderick Martin, and Al-Qaeda Muhammad, I believe is how you say it. While Muhammad is coming off of a great game on Thanksgiving, McNeil is fantastic, and Zadarius Smith has been an awesome trade for the Detroit Lions. The defensive line is thin, right? This might not look like an awful front 4 for the Lions to start with, even though 2 of them are backups. But again, Levi Onwuzurike is not available, one of their depth rushers. Mekhi Wingo is not available anymore as one of their depth pass rushers. Josh Paschal, he's not available this game as one of their depth pass rushers. James Houston is not on the roster anymore, so he is not available as a depth pass rusher. Truly going into this game, this is pretty much it. They don't have much more depth behind these 4, and I do think that could lead to quite a bit of fatigue and potentially, at least late in the game, the Detroit Lions allowing some big plays on the ground if they are not in the lead. Their linebacking core is going to be rotated around quite a bit. Jack Campbell will play a ton of snaps, as will Trevor Nowaske when needing a Sam linebacker. The rest of the linebacker duties, I do think, will be split between Quan Alexander, Jamal Adams, Benjamin Neiman, and potentially a couple of other guys. They've had a lot of rotation. Of course, losing 4 of their top 5 linebackers this season has not been kind to the Lions' depth. They do have some talent in there. They kind of, readjusted and kind of regained some talent with Alexander and Adams joining the roster, but both of them are still green. Both of them are not familiar with the playbook yet. And I think while both of them could be used in specific roles, I don't know how much and how often the Detroit Lions are going to use them. I don't know how much leash that they're going to have in a defense that already has a lot of production and potentially has a couple of players that are more ready to contribute right now, like some of the players that have been around. So, with that being said, with the injuries taken into account, I do think that the Green Bay Packers will take this victory. I think in a 26-21 low scoring slugfest of a game, I think the Green Bay Packers take it. It is a very tough to win 11 games in a row in the NFL for any team, let alone a team that is facing as many injuries as the Detroit Lions. In a shortened week, right, coming off of that Thanksgiving emotional victory for the first time in 8 years, with depth issues, with injury concerns, with so much going against the Detroit Lions right now, and the Green Bay Packers being relatively healthy, I don't think the Detroit Lions emerge victorious in this one. I think just like last year on Thanksgiving, the Green Bay Packers come into Ford Field on Thursday night and they take a victory over the Detroit Lions, splitting the season series, putting the Detroit Lions within just half a game of the Minnesota Vikings and potentially back into the second seed based on what Philadelphia does. I think this will be a close game. I think that both teams have an opportunity to win, like I've been saying, and I do think there is a world where the Detroit Lions win this game. I do think there's a world where the Detroit Lions get out to a good lead. They run the ball really well. If Dan Skipper can pass protect really well again, there's a chance the Lions can put up more than 21 points and win this game. But I think after an emotional week in Chicago, I think after so many injuries that they've suffered, so many moving pieces on the defensive line, and Carlton Davis not being 100%, this does feel like a little bit of a trap game. This does feel like a game the Detroit Lions could potentially drop in a close battle. And while it won't ruin the Detroit Lions season, they'll still be a top 2 seed in the conference. It does make things a lot tighter in the NFC North playoff race. And I think it'll be a tough one for the Detroit Lions to recover from. But that is just my take for today. Let me know down in the comments below what you think about this matchup. Do you think the Lions are going to win? Do you think the Lions are going to dominate? Or do you think they're going to drop a game here and go into Buffalo a little bit healthier, a little bit hungrier, and continue their climb to the top? I'm curious to hear your guys' opinions. With that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.